soft power struck out, hard power hits back. We're going to try and work out what that means. But we've got about an hour, or just over an hour, and the aim is to make this into a brainstorming. You want to talk about it, particularly after what's happened in Ukraine and Crimea, and I would urge you to see it as a brainstorming and to use your Q&A on your iPad, whether it's yours or whether it belongs to others, to try and give me ideas of where you see soft and hard power at the moment. Indeed, should we be comfortable at all with that kind of description? And I think we have to be quite questioning about it. After all, Joe Nye defined it 10 years ago. Is it still relevant? Is it hard and soft power? Is it smart power? Or could it be that by lunchtime today we've got a whole new concept which is emerging of new classification, new language, which could help us understand the challenge to essentially normative thinking, because normative thinking has discussed hard and soft power up to now. So take it from Ukraine and Crimea, but let's look as well at the Horn of Africa. Let's look as well at the challenges in the South and East China Sea. This is a much broader issue than what we've just seen in Ukraine and Crimea. So I'd like to understand from you, and certainly from the panelists who are going to stimulate the debate, where the firewalls are between hard and soft. Now, I have high-tech here, the best we could do. Soft and hard. I asked for a whiteboard, but we couldn't find one on a Saturday night at midnight. So that's the best that we can do, but I'm putting it up there because what we're going to do is try and define the different kinds of hard and soft power, where the fuzzy areas are. It'll be incomplete, it'll be very imperfect, but it'll help you visualize, including you over there. It'll be on the screens over here. Where this spectrum is moving, it'll be imperfect, as I say, but please take it in the spirit with which I suggested it, which is to try and help visualize and bring to life the challenges now where normative thinking will take our assumptions about hard and soft power in the coming hour and the coming days and the coming weeks ahead. And we have to ask as well how much naivete there is in the assumption now about hard and soft power. How much soft and hard power is being used by Al-Shabaab, by the Taliban as well. Who else is out there in this space, and how smart are they getting about using it? And that's what this panel will hopefully highlight for you. And how to deliver hard, soft, whatever power it is, at the right time, in the right place. I would encourage all those who are the next generation of GMF attendees, please see this as your chance to enter the discussion, because it's, after all, your areas which are going to be affected by the new judgments on hard and soft power in the coming years. So what I'm going to ask the panelists is how they define hard and soft power. And who do we have for you? You know them all anyway. General John Allen, who was until last year the commander of ISAF. Gitte, Lilleund, Bech, who was the Danish defense minister. Ishii, who is the director general of the foreign ministry of Japan. And also Alex Rondos, who's now the special representative for the European Union in the Horn of Africa. So take that as a very clear cue to you that this is far beyond Crimea, even though there are going to have to be major switches in assumptions of hard and soft power because of what you've all been discussing for the last 48 hours and what we heard in even the last session as well. This is building on that spirit of discussion and concern. So let me immediately just ask each of you for a quick definition. John Allen, is there a definition of hard and soft power? Help us begin to populate this spectrum.
Well, I think as Professor Nye sought to create the distinctions, the implication was that soft power was about influence, hard power was about coercion. And so in many respects, soft power relies on expressing values, one's culture, one's policy objectives in a manner that are acceptable to the target against whom or with whom you're expressing those outcomes. So if we seek to achieve influence, it's by leveraging those aspects of our culture, those important immutable values that we stand for, and to wrap them in the right kinds of policy objectives, ultimately to achieve the influence that you seek. Hard power, on the other hand, is not just military power. It's often misinterpreted that way. Hard power can be very much economic power as well. And the challenge for us has been to, in the recent years, to combine the best of soft power and the most likely application of hard power into a comprehensive use of power overall. Joe Nye, in fact, would move on to a concept called smart power, where he was concerned that the differentiation between hard and soft power had created too bright a distinction. So comprehensive employment of power in a strategic context, from a comprehensive policy approach, coherent policy approach, clearly expressed through strategic communications, is the best way, from my perspective, to take advantage of the influence of soft power and ultimately, if necessary, the coercive effects of hard power.
And quickly, do you think hard and soft is the right way of explaining the dilemma now and the options?
I think it was, at a point, it was a useful distinction in order to explain broad categories of capabilities. But I think that distinction can create a bright line between the two that differentiates communities that can bring to bear hard and soft power. And if all the stakeholders are not part of the policy process, then by creating those distinctions, we lose the opportunity to blend the two at the right moment and in the right place to achieve the policy objectives that we seek. So it played a purpose, but we may in fact have moved on past those bright lines and those bright distinctions.
Okay, well, help us populate that later with the changes and the modifications we need. That, if you like, the military mind, if I can put it that way, John. First, let's move on to Gitte now with the political approach as someone who has been responsible for defense. But how much broader is soft power and hard power to you?
Well, if I can come up with two examples, soft power to me is when I have an Afghan village asking my soldiers, can you help us find a teacher because we want a school so our kids, not just the boys but also the girls, can go to school. That's actually soft power. Hard power, of course, you have the military part, but hard power is also, well, if we look into what happened in Estonia years ago with the cyber attack. Cyber attack is use of hard power, but we normally, well, I agree with General Allen that most people think hard power is just by it's a question of deployment of military, and that's not the case anymore. But I would also agree with General Allen that we don't, in political terms, we don't talk about soft power and hard power anymore. What we've done in Denmark is we're discussing the comprehensive approach, because you need to combine your soft power and your hard power whenever you go into theater. Whenever you deal with politics, it's not just about one or the other. You have to combine it.
And John, do you agree cyber is hard power?
It certainly can be, yes.
Okay. Just help us, Gitte, with populating this area. What other things could we put in at this point to help us understand what's in the mushy middle ground? Think about it.
Yeah.
Okay. Masa, let's move to your framing in Tokyo at the moment of hard and soft power, particularly with the major dilemmas now being confronted by you and your government, given what has happened and what precedent has now been set in Crimea.
Thank you, Nick. And I simply don't know why I'm here, but maybe...
We're delighted to see you.
Maybe because I have a soft head or something.
But you took a long flight here to Brussels, and we'd like to hear about Tokyo's position.
Before taking up a few examples, let me talk about two things. Number one, I think it's impossible to draw a clear line between soft and hard. Number two, I think soft power without the backing of hard power, it's too soft to be a power. So it has to be a combination of it. So having said all this, let me give you 2 or 3 examples, right? One, at this moment, 3 Chinese border controlling agencies' ships are floating within 24 nautical miles of the Senkaku Islands, and the equivalent number of Japanese ships are just saying, side by side and telling them, we love you, but don't go away, this is our territory. And that's what I call hard power. Now, second example. ODA, Official Development Assistance, that sounds like very soft power, but if we use that for giving Coast Guard ship to Indonesia, letting the Philippine Coast Guard to buy 10 brand new Coast Guard ships, is it still a soft power? Third example, rule making. Whenever we have accidental conflicts on sea, normally these are triggered by the clash among fishermen, right? So it's always good to have a basic fishery agreement. We haven't had that with Taiwan for years. Now that the tension in that area is getting a little bit higher, we have decided to conclude it. And then we have done that. So concluding fishery agreement sounds like a very soft power approach, but this is to prevent the accidental conflict. So is it the soft power, hard power? So that brought me back to the first premise. We cannot draw a clear line.
Is a reassessment having to be made in Tokyo at the moment of how hard power and soft power can work, given the challenge you now face in the islands? And you have to assume that Beijing is looking at what happened in Crimea and what Russia did in a rather interesting way.
Well, as a start, I think we and Chinese share the same perspective in relation to Crimea. No unilateral change of the status quo by force. When it comes to the rule of law, we maybe the assessment or the what we mean by rule of law can be different between Japan and China. But I guess by watching what's happening in Crimea, we cannot help but to think about the possibility of strengthening our hard power, and just for the sake of deterrence. And that's what we've been working on.
Alex, Horn of Africa, Somalia, Al-Shabaab, piracy off the coasts, hard and soft power, your definition at the moment?
Well, I think we're using both. First of all, I think that that distinction, the dichotomy, is a false one, is my own view, and I also think it's an anachronism now, in the way, both the nature of the challenges and threats we have, but also in the way we're operating. Take the European Union. We have the comprehensive approach, we call it. In other words, it's about mustering all the necessary instruments, hard and softer, so to speak, to arrive at the right place at the right time. Now, I think two or three of the challenges we have here. First of all, the European Union, for example, let me put it in shorthand, is doing defense, diplomacy, development. And the point is to try to synchronize all of those at the same time in a place like Somalia. In a broader context, I think we also need to be careful here that we don't sort of fall victim of caricatures here, meaning that the Europeans are the sort of the woolly socks and sandals brigade who turn up, you know, to do all these nice, soft, mushy things, you know, happy, clappy stuff. And then someone else does the killing.
These are your descriptions.
Yeah, they're entirely my descriptions.
If I said that to you, you'd be deeply offended.
Not in the least, not in the least. But I mean, let's be clear here that we don't become victim of a lot of caricatures. So
I should ask if there are any happy clappers with sandals in the audience who might want to respond to that.
Please do. I'll take it on right away. So what are we trying to get at here? In Somalia right now, we have a naval force offshore, and I heard reference in the previous panel to both Ocean Shield, which is NATO, and we have Atalanta, EU NAVFOR, which is the European naval force offshore, which has managed to deter piracy. The European Union is financing, with the United States primarily, AMISOM, which is the African force, which is fighting and actually, as we speak, conducting operations against Shabaab in Somalia. At the same time, we have ready a lot of money to invest in, if you will, consolidating a peace. But I think there's a message here. We've got to understand clearly, and I'm talking about my own responsibilities in the Horn. You cannot have development if you don't have security. And that is why we've got to start breaking down, in my view, some of the firewalls, as you mentioned, that have emerged between two communities, those who do security, those who do development, and discover that somehow we've got to all work together using similar resources, meaning money, and work out the financial arrangements for how we can bring what we're calling now the softer and the harder to bear at the right place at the right time.
Point of clarification, which budget does your support for 20,000 African Union troops come out of?
Development. ODA.
So where does that come on this spectrum?
Well, no one's defined, but it should be squarely in the middle when we have redefined what comprehensive strategy means in parts of the world which are deeply fragile, in other words, places which are failing or emerging from failure.
Secondly, where would you put Al-Shabaab in this, in terms of their capability to do soft and hard power, given what you're facing with them, both on land and off the coast?
It's both. I mean, outfits like Shabaab walk into spaces that are ungoverned. This is the biggest threat we have. You look at the globe, it's full of ungoverned spaces. And that is where the vultures descend. They can be ideological vultures, financial vultures, but they manipulate. It's like a host area for a virus. So they will use hard justice to claim that they're establishing new law in their communities. But their notion of hard justice is to cut off hands and stone women. You have Shabaab, which is a fairly effective military force, but when confronted by a larger force, melts away into asymmetric tactics. So I put them squarely in the middle. It's for all of us. When we say comprehensive, it's about rethinking, breaking down all the walls that exist, both conceptually and in practice.
And how well does Shabaab do when it comes to information, in the information space, in the Horn of Africa? Are they effective on soft power?
Absolutely. They control the airwaves. And I think one of the things that we all need to think of, and it's a very delicate exercise, because if we're all mainly Westerners sitting in this room, who are we to be telling Muslims how they should think? And what we're dealing with in my part of Africa is the degree to which a particularly and very hardline definition of Islam has drowned out the voice of traditional African Islam, which is a very tolerant version of its own particular faith.
All right. Gitte, I'm going to come to you in a moment with your thoughts on where to populate this. But John, on the Taliban, who you were, after all, working against for 3 years, where would you define them? How do they use, at the moment, soft and hard power, like Shabaab?
Well, I think that they would say, and really the only area where they could compete with us was in jurisprudence, the delivery of justice, in their context. So their sense was that they delivered justice, Sharia justice, in a manner that was faster, fairer, more comprehensive than could the central government. That then would be an extension of their influence and an extension of their values, which for them would be providing order and justice to the society, which they would probably call soft power in the context of how they see the universe. The reality of that, of course, was very different. And the populations which lived and endured underneath the Taliban presence and endured the Sharia justice were frequently so disenfranchised by the operationalization of that justice that it had a hard power effect, even though it was a soft power intention.
So do the Taliban move at all into the soft area?
Well, they do. They move in the information domain as well, and have used social media ultimately to get their story out first, and are in competition with us, those of us who must tell the truth as we get our story out. They're able to paint their picture and their narrative more quickly than we can. So they have moved into an area which is relatively high-tech in the context of using social media. It has accelerated their ability to make their case, but the operationalization of their case, when the population labors underneath their presence in a community, typically has a hard power outcome. That's why the population of Afghanistan, after all of these years, has moved away from a desire ultimately for the Taliban to be ascendant in the outcome of this conflict.
Right, Gitte, you've had 5 minutes. Let me give you a chance to at least help me in this middle area, certainly from the Copenhagen perspective.
Well, what I would say, well, on the soft power, you have written the influence part. And I think that word actually, well, it holds a lot of things in it, like the information, like the propaganda, like the way of affecting people's lives. So they do what you want them to do, but they don't not necessarily realize that you have been affecting their lives. So therefore, influence is actually a very good word for the soft power part. What I would say is my experience about the Taliban was actually that the Taliban was very good at using soft power. as General Allen said. What we saw in Afghanistan, and especially Helmand province, where I've been several times, we saw that they were trying to. Well, they told stories about the ISAF troops that weren't right. But if you have villages where people are not educated, then they believe in the strong leaders. And if the strong leaders tell you that these ISAF troops they are just bad, they don't follow their God, they do so and so and so, then people just believe them. So Taliban, I would like for your arrow to go even further out to the soft part. What we saw in Afghanistan also was that Taliban at certain places, they accepted that the girls could go to school. And one of the things that we've been doing from the Danish side is supporting the educational system in Afghanistan, and especially this about having girls go to school. And we said, well, that's the difference between us and Taliban. But then when the Taliban accepted some places that the girls could go to school, then, well, the argument why should the Afghan people then support us or the ISAF instead of supporting Taliban? Because Taliban was granting them the same rights.
Okay, well, keep helping. I'm sorry it's slightly small lettering, but you can see the practical challenge here. But I don't know how many other ideas are going to come up, but I hope we can at least get some capturing of what your thinking is.
Nick, I would like to put a comment on what Alex said, because what I always told my soldiers was that when they were deployed, they shouldn't just bring their military boots. They also had to bring their diplomatic shoes. And if I had female soldiers, I said, well, bring the high heels.
So how far did they move into this area then?
Very much. And they should also bring the sandals, because they should also be prepared to do part of development aid. So I think if we look into what's happening now, and I see that for most of the NATO troops, is that the military does not think of itself as just being a hard power. They are educated in dealing with soft power as well. It's diplomacy, it's development aid.
What did you have in your headquarters, General, on the development side?
Yes, thank you, Nick. We had very close relationship with all of the development stakeholders, which is the very important point that was made a moment ago. When we have then advantages, and which integrates soft and hard power in the context of how we use that force. So if you started on the far right, we had ISAF troops who were in combat operations every day against the Taliban to reduce the Taliban's ability to affect the ultimate outcome of the campaign. Then if you shifted towards the center, we had elements of the force that were training Afghans to build capacity, both to fight as an army and police as a police force. And if you continued on to the left, we were involved, the ISAF mission was involved in developing judicial capacity, supporting civil society, ensuring the rights of women, providing for education. They're not traditional military missions, but the outcome in Afghanistan was not going to be decided by military operations alone. It was to create the security platform operating in the hard end of the hard power spectrum that then permitted us to leverage those outcomes in governance, economic development, and civil society, which was going to deliver the knockout blow to the Taliban.
Let's be clear. Could those you're talking about, could they double hat or double helmet? Could they be war fighting in the morning and development in the afternoon? I'm being crude
absolutely.
there.
Yeah. And often were, frankly. Yeah. And often were. The key point was getting everyone in the room who had resources and authorities. This is another issue. Ensuring that everyone who's involved in this, we understand things like budget cycles, legal authorities, and resources so that we can maximize the interrelationships between the legal restrictions or the legal opportunities, maximize the application of resources in ways that achieve a conscious policy outcome, because everyone is in the room and everyone's put their assets on the table in a comprehensive and coordinated
Right, we've got
way.
about 35 minutes to run. Master, you want to come in?
Yeah. I just want to give you a few more examples. Our self-defense force had an operation in Samawa in Iraq, in the south. What they did was a single chapeau, that is to create road, purifying water so that the local community can drink it. So they established the contact with the community leader and then did a community relationship job. So that was the only thing. They didn't shoot even one bullet. That was their sort of 100% function.
But those are their orders, aren't they?
That's their orders.
Exactly.
Two, let me expand that the fishery agreement point a little bit more. In general, it's rule making. I mean, whenever we have a rising power, you need to do something about existing rules. Of course, the best thing is to have those rising powers swallow and accept the existing rules. But you may have to take into consideration some of their perspectives. So we have to change rules. So who is in charge, in what kind of context is a question. So if we are in charge in creating a set out to make rules, that's soft power, but the outcome of that endeavor can create a lot of situation where there's less chance for using hard power.
Alex, how would you define the ability of the AU, for example, to use both hard and soft power in the same way that we've heard from General John? They could double hat it in ISAF.
Look, the potential's there, and we should be investing heavily in helping them to do that. Right now, I think we have two challenges. One is just building up the capacity and helping the AU build the capacity. I mean, I find it quite remarkable, and I think it's something, those of us from the European Union, but also our colleagues from the United States, that there is a major military operation going on and has been going on, which is slowly clearing up space. It's being done by the African Union. We're supporting. And what we should be asking ourselves is, to what extent do we assist them to become more systematic over the long run? Because we've got Congo, we've got the Central Africa, South Sudan went pear-shaped overnight. We've got Mali, and that's just Africa, one particular and very interesting belt, which actually is the underbelly of the southern periphery of Europe. We have every reason to want to invest, because it's not, I don't believe any member state is going to be devoting its own resources and men and women to put boots on the ground all over Africa. Africa has the capacity and has the desire. We've got to invest heavily in building that capacity up. Second, I think there's another point which we're not really discussing yet.
We'll put it on the agenda now.
Diplomacy. We need to realize that when I look at my area, whether it's Somalia or South Sudan, the people who've chosen to get engaged and actually resolve these issues are the neighbors. For a long time, the idea has always been that neighbors should not be engaged in being guarantors of a peace in a country that's in crisis. In the instance of the Horn, the opposite is occurring. And I happen to think that this is a very good thing. They have a vested interest in the security of their neighborhood, of their frontiers. It's delicate, but what we're engaged in, and this is part of that in between the soft and the hard, is how do you, in effect, create and help create a capacity within a region to be able to do the work which, frankly, we're too busy and unable to do ourselves.
Right. Okay, we've got about 30 minutes to run, and what I'd like to do is somehow, I'll come to you in a moment, get some takeaways from this, and I've got a lot of ideas coming through here, so all of you, particularly practitioners, can help contribute on this. But I just want to get clarification from all four of you on one thing that Alex said, talking about this as anachronistic and a false dichotomy. General John, do you agree?
I think it is now. I think we are in peril if we try to make clear distinctions between soft power and hard power. We should look for comprehensive power, what Joe Nye called smart power, as he later sought to combine the two to prevent the differentiation.
Gitte.
Well, I agree with General Allen. I would say that, this is about the comprehensive approach. I think what we need to do now is to find out ways within the different countries or within the EU or NATO in dealing with the comprehensive approach, because we certainly can be better to doing that.
I use smart power language, and being able to use whole menu in a flexible way, that is a key.
And do you want to add anything more, Alex?
Well, apart from agreeing with myself entirely, there is an implication.
That is smart.
Smart power.
The implication is what we need to be looking at, which is that at the moment we have not adapted our systems to be sufficiently integrated to be able to support a comprehensive strategy. We have stovepipes still, and this is globally. in the United States, you have endless interagency meetings. We have our variant of it. And it's about making sure that different financial regulations, for example, we rewrite the book so that accountability is met, but flexibility exists. This is the key. And we're not there yet.
Right, okay. If you grab a microphone, possession is the secret, and I'll come to as many as possible. I've got a lot of ideas here. What I'd like you to do is be as brief as you can, please, and I will cut you off at your legs. It'll be hard power if you speak for too long. But I want you to feel this is a brainstorming, and before we go any further, let me give you 2 or 3 ideas which come up here. Quote, is lying soft power? Now, I say that came in anonymously. Is lying soft power?
That's called
Can
diplomacy.
economic sanctions plus political will harden power enough to obviate the need for military power? How Western and secular are the concepts of hard and soft power? How helpful really are these concepts to understanding conflicts with different cultures? Park those for the moment. Let's get as many other ideas. President.
The most effective form of soft power we've seen last week in the European Council, bribery. Where's bribery? From the Nord Stream former chancellor head to countries that will not sanction Russia because they have too good a deal, to paying provocateurs to go and take over buildings in Ukraine.
So where does that come on here?
I think it's all over the place.
All right. Keep going. I like this. Right. Okay, thank you. Xenia.
Xenia Dormady, Chatham House. It seems like we're not even covering half of the...
We've only been going 30 minutes.
Forces of power. It's all government here. It's all state power we've got up there. What about non-state power? What about the role of corporations? What about the role of NGOs, the Gates Foundation? What about the role of these kind of organizations who have immense power if used right? Now, can it be led? Can it be guided by the government? Maybe not. But these are entities that have enormous power that I think have to go up on your list there.
Okay, I'm putting it up as fast as you say it, please. Would anyone from a non-state, non-government organization like to come in at this point? Yes, please. Can I just get the microphone here to see if you're frustrated that too much of this is government and state, to quote Xenia?
Well, thank you very much. Legacy from TÜSİAD, Turkish Business and Industry Association. Well, exercising power is something, but generating it maybe can be tackled in a different angle. There are different sources which are certainly part of this table, like money. Right? Like finances, financial power, like the control of the energy resources, or human capital, or a country's brand value. These are all sources of power. They generate power in the international relations. Whether they are part of an exercise in implementing power or not, it's up to the panel, of course, to answer.
Well, let me just ask the General, how often were you able to use money to achieve your military ends by having a fruitful and constructive dialogue with your adversaries and parting with a bit of money as you sat around drinking tea?
Right.
Is that hard power?
On a regular basis.
You're no longer serving, General.
No, on a regular basis.
Large amounts of money?
Yes.
Is that hard power or soft power?
It's both. It's the soft power application of resources that takes the enemy off the battlefield. Now, some folks criticize that because they only know half the story. The intent of those kinds of plans, like the Sons of Iraq and the Afghan local police, etc., wasn't that they were permanent situations. They would evolve into the creation of indigenous organic economic opportunity that would permit you to not have to pay them eventually. They would ultimately reassimilate into the culture. So the idea is there's a soft power application of resources that takes battlefield fighters out of the conflict and reduces the hard power that you have to face. And it's actually part of every counterinsurgency.
So it's a very cost-effective way of using hard power and moving towards soft.
But it has to be comprehensive. It can't just end with you handing money to the fighter that's come off the field. Yeah. Ultimately, you've got to create the conditions through additional application of soft power to create institutions of governance and economic opportunity so that individual is assimilated into the society and doesn't feel the necessity to go back out and fight.
As a minister, were you comfortable with that, Gitte?
Well, actually, I had some discussions about our efforts in Afghanistan, especially about this, because what we saw from, I would say, mainly the US, was that, well, we hire a lot of young fighters who had been affiliated with Taliban. Now we hire them to work for ISAF or to work for the US military, and we pay them, and therefore they are not, well, putting IEDs, well, they're not hurting us anymore. But when the ISAF leave Afghanistan, when the US leave Afghanistan, what's left for these people? Well, Taliban will pick them again. And so therefore, I had big discussions about, this is not just about giving money to the people, or it's not about, giving fish to the people. It's actually, you have to teach them how to fish.
Again, the intention was, though, to create an outcome that didn't rely on you having to pay them off to keep them from shooting you or planting an IED. It created an outcome that permitted them to reassimilate into their villages. The reason they had a weapon in the first place was they were disassimilated. There were difficulties that couldn't be resolved by governmental capacity or economic opportunity. So you get them off the battlefield and you create the opportunity for them to stay off the battlefield. That was the fulfillment of that policy.
All right, let's hear some more ideas.
Nick,
please.
may I, on this, I think this is a critical issue. When we've got these crises, too often we don't go back to asking the basic question, is this about grievance or is it about greed?
Yes.
My own conclusion is, in most instances, it's about greed wrapped in the flag of national, religious, or other grievance. But it starts with greed. 2 examples. South Sudan is a country that has collapsed, and 90% of its revenue comes from oil. Right now, as we speak today, that government is getting almost 15 million a day coming in revenue, with which it's now on the market trying to buy helicopter gunships. Now, in the meantime, we are committing tens of millions for humanitarian purposes. Something doesn't quite add up here. I'm going to be I'm sure I'm going beyond the bounds of what I should be allowed to say, but, and contrary to all the rules of sovereignty, take the cocaine off the table. If money's the cocaine of South Sudanese politics, the neighbors should be the first ones interested in saying, let's create an international control of the revenue of that country. Point 1. Point 2, though, that I've heard about business. We forget how often solutions are actually found through the private sector. They have a vested interest in stability or instability. They will go where they can make a profit. If you can work with the private sector in a place like Somalia, where they're brilliant entrepreneurs, get them to be the brokers with the politics and get them to finance good politics as opposed to nefarious politics. We who sit in governments often turn up our nose at this, and we're missing an essential component of how to move ahead in finding solutions.
Quickly, anyone else from business who wants to come in on that, where you might fit in? We've heard one voice from Turkey. Anyone else at the moment? Please, are you from business? Are you from business? No, okay. Are you from business? Yes, right. Let's...
I'm actually cheating because I'm in business, in energy business now, but I used to be State Secretary for Foreign Affairs in Denmark.
That's why I did look at you. That's why I looked at you and said...
I think...
you haven't jumped the queue, otherwise I'll cut your legs off with a bit of hard power.
But I'll cut your legs off, because I think there's some misunderstanding here. I don't want to put words into Professor Nye's mouth, but I think that his whole point of his book was after 9/11 was that that was a kind of a hard power, but Taliban was actually soft power. But so the 21st century should be ruled by soft power. The point is, after Crimea, is that correct? I mean, should we? Isn't the combination?
Yes.
As you have said. For instance, if we decided that we should move in the direction of Ukraine being a member of NATO, is that hard power? I think it is. But on the other hand, and now I'm putting my energy hat on, if we decided more forcefully that the heads of state of government did the other day, that we should turn the gas off in Europe from Russia, then the Russian economy would collapse, and we can do that. I'm not taking my energy.
At that point, is it such a hard act that it moves into hard power, even though it doesn't involve any bloodletting?
I think it does.
It does.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. We're getting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right down here, please. And I'm looking towards the back as well. At any point, take the microphone, please. Oh. Have you got the microphone?
Okay.
No.
It's
Who's
not.
got the
It's
microphone?
still
I'll
not
come back
working.
to you.
I can.
I'll come back to you. Who's got the microphone? Please, yes, at the front, and we'll go over there as well. Please.
Willie Stevens. I believe that hard and soft power are only means. The objective is to serve interest. Hard interest and soft interest. Hard interest being security, economic resources, and soft interest, values and principles. Should that not be incorporated in this discussion here?
Is the microphone working?
I'd contend that the interests need to be integrated as well and fulfilled, ultimately served by the right combination of hard and soft power.
Who's next? Who's got the microphone? A microphone that works, please.
İlter Turan from Istanbul University. First, I have an offer that the word smart be banned from use, because it seems that it's an escape category to evade substantial questions. Smart casual, smart defense, and now we have smart power, a self-congratulatory expression which does not give us any indication of where we should proceed. So, but secondly, I think when we conceptualize the problem as power, we run into this difficulty that we focus on the instruments of power rather than their use. And so then we end up saying hard and soft. And the fact is that there was an earlier word used by the general about coercion versus persuasion. So I think if we start with the aim of what we're trying to do and go back, it would be easier, because we fall into this trap as to you get an instrument and you begin to debate as to whether it is hard and soft. But then it soon becomes apparent that what you're really talking about is how you use it rather than what it is. Exactly. So I just offer to reconceptualize the whole thing.
Good point.
John, you're putting up your thumb in agreement, presumably.
Exactly. Again, the policy process has to be coherent. It has to start with your decision of what the objectives need to be, and then you combine the means, which are a combination of hard and soft power, to both influence and, if necessary, to coerce to achieve those policy objectives. So it's an integrated approach.
Anyone else want to come in?
I agree.
Okay, I'm going to get as many of you to speak in the next 20 minutes as possible, so please just be patient, even if you have to put up your hand several times, please.
Thank you. My name is Khalil. I'm from Jagiellonian University, Krakow, graduate student. I want to use this opportunity. Soft power for me was this very smart use of Taliban, the opportunity given in Qatar to actually promote their agenda, although if it was for a few hours or few days or whenever it was, using their banners and using their names. So it was not just soft power, it was smart power, I guess. The use of money, General mentioned that I believe there was a few examples I could use that turned out to be disastrous because it was intentionally, it was soft power, but it turned out to be hard power. One was the local police, Afghan local police, that was given the guns, and it turned out disastrous. And the second one was DDR, actually implemented by Japanese government. It's the disarmament, this demobilization, reintegration of the former armed forces, which it did not really help. And at the same time, the local police getting the gun, so basically kind of outdated the other program.
You've used the term smart power. You said don't use the term smart power. Is there a consensus here about whether, if we're trying to somehow, you said it was highly anachronistic, whether we should be using the word smart? Anyone? Masa, yes or no?
Smart?
Okay.
Yeah. I agree. Use smart. I normally say that in Denmark we went from being a small state to being a smart state. And therefore I vote for smart.
You know, we'll get lost in the semantics here. Just get it right is the issue.
Okay.
It seems to me.
That sounds like being smart if you get it right.
Absolutely.
All right.
But let's get to the details.
Yeah, I think the context is it needs to be comprehensive. It needs to be comprehensive. It needs to include everything.
Is that smart?
Yeah.
Yes, I suppose it is. But I don't sit down in a policy or a strategy process and say, I'm going to do smart power now. I'm going to start by doing hard power, and then I'm going to end with soft power. What we do is we determine what our outcome is going to be, what our objective is going to be. We bring everyone together who has a stake in the process, and we integrate their capabilities to achieve that outcome. Now, that's a comprehensive approach. If everyone feels better by being able to say we've got a little bit of soft power going on here and a little bit of hard power, and it all fits underneath smart power, if I can get the comprehensive approach because I approach it that way, I'm happy with that. But in the end, it's about a comprehensive application of a policy process that leverages all the ways and means that are available to us in what are traditionally called hard and soft areas to get us to successful policy accomplishment.
Masa, I've got a question here on power and history. Isn't Japan significantly undermining its soft power by its handling of history?
I didn't know that this is about history, but...
Well, you can answer it whichever way you want, but I'm just telling you that that's been put on the agenda, if you want to just respond to that.
Okay. The message I just want to spread out is that, as Prime Minister made quite clear a few days ago, we have no intention to change the history. We have no intention to change the assessment of the history. We accept the outcome of the history. So that is the intention and how Prime Minister feels at this moment. And by the way, we had a discussion yesterday whether we can change the history or not. And the outcome was that you cannot change what happened, but you can change the interpretation of that. And what I'm saying is that Prime Minister is not going to change the interpretation of what happened. So I think we have accepted history squarely, and I think that has been and will continue to be the source of our strengths for persuasion.
Okay, please.
Thank you very much. I do believe that they are probably hard power, soft power, but there's also not enough power. And from this point of view, we're going into a debate which has nothing to do with what we basically learned in Crimea. In Crimea, we simply believed that economic interdependence is not going to allow certain actors to do certain things. They did it. And after they did it, we understand that economic interdependence is becoming a problem to respond to them. This is part, in my view, of the crisis that we're talking about, and this is not about hard and soft power. And I do believe that this very debate, defining yourself through hard or soft power, is changing the story because we don't know how to talk about power these days. And this is my last point. Before, normally foreign policy was you're mobilizing domestic resources in order to have impact outside of your borders. Now we are trying to mobilize global resources in order to stabilize at home. Look at most foreign policy players, they're using their foreign policy to solve domestic problems, economic, political, and others. And in my view, this is changing the game, and not simply how we're going to define hard or soft power.
But haven't they addressed it by saying this is anachronistic? Right
Listen,
at the beginning.
I'm living now in Vienna, and in Habsburg monarchy, they have discovered soft power before us. It was the royal marriages. They said, we're not going to fight anybody because we have beautiful daughters. And unlike you can basically marry everybody, you don't need to fight. But it's always basically a problem if you're going to come with the childless family and there is nobody to marry.
All right, keep the messages coming. Keep the messages coming here. Misha as well, and Anton, please.
Well, when we talk about soft power, we forget one thing, the reforms. I mean, what happened in Georgia and how reforms are being responded. You know, the most popular book in Kyrgyzstan was a book by a Russian author, How Georgia Made It. The same thing in Cairo. The same thing the other day in Miami at a bar. A Kenyan came to me and told me everything about Georgia reforms, even the things I didn't know. And that's what Facebook does. And one thing should be realized. Georgia had made it to top 10 among all the countries in terms of ease of doing business. Russia is 137th. Now they're trying to move it. Ukraine is 139th. We were, a country knows that, according to European Union studies, the safest country in Europe and one of the 3 least corrupt countries in Europe.
But
now,
let me just press you. Let me just press you. When you were president, how much were you anguishing over hard and soft power?
You know, why did we do it? First, in 2005, Russia did full-blown energy embargo. And what it allowed us to refurbish our sector, kill corruption, and now we are energy self-sufficient. When we had full-blown economic embargo, and we had double-digit growth 4 years after that, which means that we refurbished our economy and again killed corruption and again liberalized it. So the way how we proceeded, the way Georgia proceeded, created a soft power impact, including the Russia. By 2008, when Russia attacked it, one should be realized. By that moment, lots of Russian intellectuals, and not only the press, was asking, why can we not have police like Georgia? Why can we not have economic growth like Georgia? Why cannot we have roads without Georgia? Georgia without having oil money? So what happened really, now in Georgian case, was that we basically overwhelmed them with our soft power. Indeed, Medvedev, who officially was our enemy, said, well, by the way, I hate Saakashvili, but we should copy reforms from them.
Okay,
this was the guy whom Putin promised to hang by balls.
But let me press you, because I need to know your assessment now, 2014, on what is happening with hard and soft power. We can talk about 2008, but things have moved on.
Okay, let's continue. Now, when I go to Ukraine...
No, I'd like you to answer that question about where hard and soft power are now.
I can tell you what happened after that. Russia applied something that either is soft or hard. Let's judge. And that this was not, at large mentioned. It was mentioned by Tom Ilves, but money. Georgia's economy of GDP of less than $20 billion. Russia poured into our last elections, and we are a democracy, $2 billion. $2 billion that it gave to Russian oligarch. They poured in $2 billion, and when you have economy of $20 billion, with still people living with diminished poverty from 50% down to 22%, people vote for such things. And people went for such things. As the result, what we got? Mass-scale crackdown on corruption. Oh, sorry, this time not on corruption, on opposition. 100 more cases of arrests and indictment of opposition members. And looks like we might not have next normal elections at all anymore. So what it really happens, this money, what was put with, whether you call it soft power or not, to kill the Georgia reforms that were brand all over the region, including Russia. It was killed off, this time not by military force, which couldn't do this trick in 2008. They occupied our areas, but Georgia boomed after that for 4 years in a row. What really happened was then they came in after this boom with money, and basically they established a system that allows now to kill all the things that were not killed by energy embargo, by economic embargo, by provocations, by terrorist attacks, and then by the war. And what happened? Then money came in, and money produced the trick. And that's what I'm scared for about Ukraine and some other places. This is the aggression and, military intervention is an immediate threat. But what will happen in 6 months from now, 1 year from now? Where will these Ukrainian oligarchs that depend upon Russian oligarchs be? If they don't implement this, even if they implement the reforms, because when I went to this square in Kiev 1 month ago, people were shouting, we want your reforms. I went to the university, there are 3,000 students. They knew more about my reforms than most of my ministers. I mean, Eka is here. But if they don't get it, then what will happen? In Ukraine's case, it will be more billions coming in, but there's enough billions in Putin's hand.
Right.
Will he buy their democracy? Will he kill their system? The way how he did in Georgia.
All right, so you've confirmed where bribery and money can move in that direction.
Bribery and also electoral process. Electoral process.
Thank you.
It's not only bribing some concrete officials.
What's it like in the Horn of Africa, the use of money?
Oh, it's all over.
Is it hard
power?
Follow
the money.
Hard power?
It's both, depends. If you've got black money and illicit goods, that's the way you buy off officials and governments and convert a whole system. If you use it well, you actually redistribute. You've got a region. I'm responsible for a region where they're discovering hydropower and oil. There's going to be a bonanza coming. Now the issue is this money going to be used to bring people's level of life up, or will it become a source of division and civil conflict? And that's the challenge.
Okay. Microphone there, please.
I think even in the Afghanistan context, one of the things that we forget is the way the Taliban have used money, drug money. So while an attempt was made to use money to buy Taliban fighters, the Taliban have used it far more smartly.
Smartly, would you call that hard power?
I would call it hard power because it's recruitment.
Okay, good. Let's get more contributions like that. At the back, please. Anton first, then the microphone at the back, please. The microphone will come to you, Anton.
Anton LaGuardia from The Economist. I mean, first of all, on the semantic point, nobody ever calls it stupid power. So maybe we should get away from the idea of smart power. Secondly, we've tended to talk about ungoverned spaces inevitably in this conversation, Afghanistan, Somalia, parts of Africa. In a sense, this conversation is also interesting in governed space. So, for example, on the use of cyber, the same tools that are used by criminals to steal passwords can also be used for espionage. The same tools that are used for DDoS people who sort of take over the bots can be used for a DDoS attack, as we saw in Georgia and in. So you need, in a sense, you need to put cyber all the way down the line. On Sasha's point about oligarchs, it sort of also works the other way. I mean, one of the things that appears to have worked in Ukraine was economic pressure put by sanctions on Ukrainian oligarchs, and sort of to push them to move against Yanukovych. And the third point is, I don't think that Western countries have quite understood what happens in governed space, let's say in Europe, when means sort of below military attack are used. For example, to undermine countries, for example, to use Russian minorities, or sort of. We haven't thought about the response. What is the trigger for a response when you start eating away and fragmenting countries that may be vulnerable? And I don't think we've thought hard enough about how that response works.
Okay, please, at the back.
I'd like to add the power of culture. Mr. Putin presides today over a traditional society wave of culture of dependency, which influences the conservative movements, not only in Russia, but throughout Europe and in many other places of the world. This is generated as a soft power, but it has direct hard power consequences that we are monitoring today.
Is it becoming harder, do you think, now?
It's becoming hard. It's generated as soft, but it's becoming hard.
Okay.
Great observation.
Anyone else, please? Yes, at the front.
Gian Giacomo Migone from Italy. I think it's important that we should get away from a division of labor between soft and hard power, because we're in a multipolar world. And to make an example, the European Union needs perhaps not more hard military power, but it should work better, because we're spending an immense budget, 50% almost of the US budget, and we have a 10% more or less efficacy. On the other hand, I think the US should improve its soft power. And I mean, we see the results. For instance, in Iraq and Afghanistan is still doubtful. My last point, I'm looking at the ambassador, is that sometimes countries like Japan, Germany, and Italy have a lesson in their historical experience. You learn more from defeat than from victory. And perhaps our lesson is to lower, in the general interest, the military power.
All right, thanks. General Allen, a particular question here from Sarah Wagner. What are the lessons learned from counterinsurgency as an effort to combine hard and soft power? Can you just answer that immediately?
It's an extraordinarily important question, because in the end, the security dimension of a counterinsurgency campaign isn't the end state. The security dimension of a counterinsurgency campaign creates the conditions where governance and economic opportunity can take root. That then is the outcome that you desire. It is the knockout blow, if you will, against the insurgent, is to ultimately address those issues of grievance that Alex talked about. And that is the lesson learned from us, is to ensure that you have an integrated approach to the employment of all of your capacity to create the security platform on which then credible governance and economic opportunity can emerge, and then sustain it.
There's a question here from Jackson James, which I'd just like to give you notice of for the end of the session. What is the best illustration or case study of a useful, effective mix of soft and hard power? Think about that as I get some more questions. And we're finishing in 10 minutes. Please, down here.
Hello, my name is Gitte I come from Georgia, Georgian government. One thing I want to mention, it's indeed, unfortunately, democracy is not killed in Georgia. We're trying our best, actually, to make a progress down the way. Now, very quickly to address the semantics of hard and soft power and smart, I think any power could be used in a smart way or a non-smart way. And now coming back to our topics of discussion, when we speak about Russia and Ukraine, I think what Mr. Putin, unfortunately, and quite smartly uses is a combination of the both, particularly think about propaganda and ideology done by controlled media in Russia, which gives Mr. Putin an immense support in public. He has never been so popular as he is now in the background of the Ukraine events or Georgia events back in 2008. It's a continuation of the same story, and how this fits his hard powers. So I think there is something to add to this chart. Thank you.
Thank you. What, executive power? Presidential power almost?
No, it's a power of ideology and propaganda.
Okay, thank you. Please, over there, and then the microphone will go further back.
Bente Schiller from the Beirut office of Heinrich Böll Foundation. This adds pretty well what I wanted to say, because the power of definition maybe, or the power of information, you tackled it briefly regarding Afghanistan, where actually I saw exactly that happening. Who speaks first kind of really determines forever the narrative, and this is what happened in Syria. Assad has invented this narrative of it's me or the Islamists. He has been speaking about terrorists before they were there, and then like this, if we put it more onto the soft end, he has beefed it up, of course, by releasing Salafists from his prisons in order to make happen what he actually was announcing. How well are we prepared to deal with this, since we have seen this problem, and it has affected us really strongly in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and it affects us in many other places. What can we do to deal with it? And maybe this also reaches into the cyber area that was mentioned by one of the speakers here.
Thank you. As the microphone moves, is anyone sitting there deeply frustrated by this conversation, thinking we've got the wrong end of the stick, we've missed the point completely, because we've got 10 minutes and I'd like to hear your voice? Are you frustrated? All right, I'll come to you in a moment. Please, at the back.
Thanks. Thanks, Matt Bryce, International Center for Defense Studies in Estonia. One great example of comprehensive use of power is energy infrastructure and pipelines. If you have political will, as was the case in Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey back in the late 90s, to build a pipeline uniting the countries, that pipeline project, with commercial investment, if it's commercially viable, can actually redraw the strategic map in a positive way. And in fact, it is the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan oil pipeline, South Caucasus gas pipeline, that has guaranteed the independence of Azerbaijan and has deterred a lot of coercion by Russia against Azerbaijan. Similar opportunities exist now in the Baltic states to connect them to the EU, and in the Eastern Mediterranean, where there's a way to bring Israel, Turkey, and Cyprus together on some cooperative energy infrastructure projects.
Thank you very much indeed. Your frustrations, please, about this debate. I should tell you that I just had one message from Cornelie Gumbi, which is, I think, really rather useful. Obama is a perfect example of soft power. Putin is a perfect example of hard power. And I'm adding now, but which is the most effective?
Yeah, I would like to add up on the frustration. What is missing here for me, my name is Bogdana, I come from Ukraine. And what is missing here for me in this chart, actually, it's not only about soft and hard power, but it's also about the responsibility and the ability of somebody to stand for soft and hard power. So it's more kind of in dimensions, you know. And the frustration comes from the point, like, for example, if you're an ordinary citizen, and you walk around Kiev and you have a ribbon like this and you see a police, you run away, you know, because you as a citizen are not able to stand against the military power. And this is where the responsibility of the others come in. And secondly, also when this is about Ukraine, which gave up its nuclear weapons simply because for the security guarantees. So the question is, when does the responsibility come in of somebody who has also the power to protect a country like Ukraine? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Let me get two more interventions. Who's got the microphone now, please?
Matthew from Washington. I'm a little bit frustrated by this conversation as well because of the starting point. You drew on the board here a linear diagram with two different camps. And I think that is not quite the picture that we're trying to transmit, that we eventually would like to upload and have millions of people like around the world. What we want to do is we want to have a picture or composition that has different tools that we can use to paint this composition. We can then maybe apply a couple of different filters to it using an Instagram example. Cultural filter, time of day, time of season, perspective, wide angle. And again, that will allow us to have a picture of the diplomatic solution that will be liked by as many people as possible.
All right, I do apologize. I haven't been able to do a three-dimensional morph diagram in the last 45 minutes, but I hope you understand we all have frailties. Please, who's got the microphone?
Yes, Keiro Kirigami from Japan. I agree with Mr. Ishii that the
on the Prime Minister's position on history. And I think historical revisionism would be a grave strategical mistake on Japan's part. But having said that, we are here talking about how to use soft power and hard power, but we should also understand on the defensive side, there are countries who use soft power in order to hide what they're doing with hard power. And I would say that China is doing exactly that, saying that, going back to the values of the Second World War and propagating all these ideas, they are faking everyone out about what they're doing maritime aspect with hard power.
All right, thank you. Which allows me, Masa, to ask you, and I realize that given that you represent the foreign ministry, this is not an easy question, simply because the dynamic is so profound at the moment. But can you just give us an idea of what kind of reassessment is now having to be done in Tokyo because of what has happened in Crimea, particularly in the last 10 days, and particularly when you look at what's happening in the islands, what you're hearing from Beijing, and also when you hear the concerns of your neighbors like Vietnam and the Philippines about what might happen, but this ability to essentially achieve your aims by breach of international law, and what, therefore, Japan's options are. Quickly, if you can.
Yeah. I think we have created in a timely manner what we call NSC. We have now the better coordination among defense and the foreign policy. And this NSC is working perfectly in facing with this Crimea case. And I think, as I mentioned several times, this is not your issue. This is our issue as well. And as you said, the countries in the region feel in the same way. So, as I said, first, every country has to do within their own authority to become stronger. I mean, to be ready for the same kind of happening. And number two is, I think, just to create a better coordination among like-minded countries who may face with the same kind of situation. And
therefore, can we assume that in your minds you're having to think of moving right along this line towards harder power?
Not necessarily.
When it comes to Article 9 of the Constitution?
Well, the discussion has been going on whether we should change the interpretation of Article 9 so that we can use some part of the collective defense right. But we haven't, no decision has been made yet. But I think even if we do decide to do it, that only doesn't work. I mean, somebody talks about culture, somebody talked about history. I think we need to do something about history, and then and we need to tell everybody what we've been doing since the end of the Second World War, and we've been contributing a lot to the peace of the world. So I think together with those elements, we can get ourselves stronger.
But it's a new challenge for you in Tokyo, literally, normatively in the last few days.
Yep.
Right, the last 3 or 4 minutes, please.
May I just very quickly, to the point that Ishii was making, the 18 March editorial in the Global Times, which is a Chinese publication, said that there are two tasks that emerge from the Ukraine for the Chinese. One is to seek to be helpful in the bringing of order out of the chaos and prevent escalation, but the other point was very important. It said the Chinese people should remember the final say in geopolitical competition is military strength. China should speed up its military modernization. So this has not been lost on all of those who are observing whether international order is a function of rules and international law, or whether it's a function of pure military power.
And we know the political decision about strengthening the defense budget and defense spending in Moscow. The last 3 or 4 minutes, Alex, that question I put to you about whether there is one example, a good point we can put onto the table to say there's been a successful mix of soft and hard, smart, whatever you want to say. Is there a good example that anyone can follow as an object lesson in how it could be done? From your experience?
Well, I would venture, though I'm taking a real risk here, that in a couple of years' time we will be looking back on Somalia and say this place that was considered sort of a permanent sort of occupant of the garbage bin of history and a total disaster has actually turned the corner and has become an example of how an absolute catastrophic situation is put together, the total collapse. And as a result of us, if you will, learning on the job and managing to do hard security, getting the right type of diplomacy to get the right neighbors engaged, getting the proper type of softer money to promote business, to promote giving pirates an alternative living, for example. Getting ex-Shabab to have a better life. This is only part of it. So I think what's happened in the last 2 or 3 years has been a sort of a convergence of these various strands, and I'd venture that in a short while we'll be able to look back and say, my goodness, this has worked.
Success. Good. Excellent. Okay, well, you heard it here, the prediction. Right, Gitte, your thought about where there may be a positive model or an experience. Is there one in your mind?
Yeah, well, I'll come back to the one that I took up in the beginning. Where I saw it work was at the patrol baseline in Helmand, where my troops were fighting Taliban in the morning. And in the evening, they were actually discussing with the older people in the village about education in school. And the older people asked, can you help us find a teacher so we can teach the kids?
We'll take that away, from boots to shoes and sandals.
Exactly.
Masa, quickly, any great example in your mind which you teach at your diplomatic school?
I must make a point about institution building. Institution building is the way to try to involve people, including new rising powers. And I think the future of G7, future of G8, future of G20, future of some of the institutions having been built in Asia, like East Asia Summit, will have a big impact on the behavior of all the main players. So,
General Allen.
I was deeply involved in the South Asia tsunami in 04-05, and it is one of the great examples, I think, of the massive application of the tools of hard power that played out in the rescue and the relief and the reconstruction for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that were affected in this regard. It not only immediately had the effect in soft power context of saving people's lives, putting societies back on track, it was a large measure contributing factor in solving of the separatist movement in Aceh, in Sumatra. It also brought together states from all over the region that played a really critical role in the relief of the South Asian tsunami, but then created relationships thereafter, which have endured beyond that. And frankly, when our good friends, the Chinese, watched us in action, they immediately commented on the strategic outcome of the relationships that will have been created through the application of the means of hard power to achieve decisive soft power outcomes.
John, Gitte, Masa, and also Alex, thank you very much indeed. We've got through an enormous amount in the last hour and 15 minutes. Thank you very much for all your contributions. I know it's imperfect. It is a takeaway. You can roll it up. It might be a historic document for all you know, so you better keep it. This may be the moment that the GMF Brussels Forum initiative on hard, soft, smart, and the next gets remembered as an important takeoff point. But thank you all very much indeed for entering the spirit of the brainstorming.
Nick.